Okay, cool. All right, I'll go ahead and bring the Planning Commission meeting of December 5th to session, and we'll start with the roll call.
Thank you. Chair Lane?
Here.
Commissioner Tonelli?
Here.
Commissioner Sokolov?
Here.
Commissioner Lamb is excused. Commissioner Lerner?
Here.
Okay, the next item is public comments, and what we do on every meeting is we open up the one item for anything that's not on the agenda, in case somebody has something to bring up that they want to talk to us about, either something that we might be interested in knowing about, or bringing up some whatever's on their mind that would be appropriate that's not on the agenda. Sometimes that leads us to investigate some other area of planning. All right, so I'll go ahead and open the public comment section for anything on the agenda. The mad rush to the microphone doesn't happen, so I'll go ahead and close the public hearing. So that was attempted and failed again. All right. All right, we have the approval of the minutes from August 22nd, which was our last meeting. There was no meeting in I guess October, was that right?
There was the joint session.
There was a joint session. We had a joint session. Okay. All right. So the approval of minutes for August 22nd. Any comments or changes on that?
That I noticed.
Okay. Now, any motion and a second?
I move that we approve the minutes of August 22nd, 2018 as submitted. Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, and one excused. All right, then the next item is the public hearing elements, and we have two items on that session. Here's how this is going to work. We'll go ahead and open up an item, and then the staff will give us an overview of the various aspects of it. We already have a complete packet on that, and many of us have been on the sites already. And then we'll go ahead and open it up for the public comment of anybody who wants to talk on that. We'll start with the applicant, and then we'll close the public comment section, bring it back to the commission for discussion and action as appropriate. All right. So let's go ahead, and then we'll start with the first item 4A, special structures permit at 355 Stevick Drive, and I'll start with the staff report.
Thank you, Chair. So the request before you tonight at 355 Stevick is a special structures permit to allow for consideration of a swimming pool, which the Atherton zoning ordinance defines as an accessory structure to be located less than 8 feet from the main residence. The site on Stevick, if you didn't have the opportunity to drive by, is currently under construction with the main residence. It's a detached garage, tennis court, and some other ancillary accessory structures. The proposed swimming pool you can see here, the rendering on the screen. As I mentioned, swimming pools as accessory structures are required to be located 8 feet from the main house, and you can see with the mouse here the distance location from the edge of the proposed, what we're going to be referring to as a swimming pool spa, is less than 8 feet. Specifically, it's a little over a foot from the wall line of the main house. If you move your way towards the back, or front, I guess I should say, of the pool, the distance from the edge of the pool to the main residence moving inwards to the house is over 8 feet at 8.5, specifically 8.5 feet. So the swimming pool as an accessory structure does meet and actually well exceeds all other setback requirements for an accessory structure, both at the front, rear, and side property lines. A little bit about this pool itself. The pool is a swim spa, so it's not your traditional swimming pool. It has a maximum depth of about 4.5 feet. The house, as I mentioned, is currently under construction, and the area in which the pool is located, the foundation of the main house does carry out to support and this associated pool. Let me just pull up a picture of what's currently underway. Or
This
at
is
least
on the right side of the house as you face it from the street side.
from the street side.
Yeah, because when I was there at first, I was looking all over the backyard looking for it, and I went, "Where's this thing? It doesn't match the plan."
So you can see this is the real world version, and here's the proposed pool. So this is the first time that the commission will have seen a special structures permit for this request of a non-standard setback requirement. You've seen several special structures permit for swimming pools, but typically those are associated with setbacks from property lines. So this is the first time that you have seen the request for a deviation of locational distance from this accessory structure to the main house at that 8-foot distance.
Okay.
As I mentioned, the plans for the house obviously are currently underway. The foundation of the house, of course, has been reviewed and approved by the city's building department. It's gone under inspections as well, and it would not have gotten this far in construction if the foundation has not been both planned and built to the minimum code requirements. I bring that up because the foundation, of course, is again associated with the swimming pool. Some other components of the proposed swim spa that are worth noting related to the safety component. I'll pull up a zoomed in site plan here. So this line where I'm outlining with the mouse, this is the outline of the main residence, and here's that courtyard area that we just saw in the picture, and here's the proposed swim spa. This line with X's that encompasses the boundary of the swim spa within the courtyard area is the minimum safety fencing requirements that would be required by building code should the permit eventually be issued for the final completion of this pool. The pool or swim spa itself is a prefabricated unit. It's constructed of steel. The project architect is here, and we're getting into a little bit more depth as to the construction type and fabrication of such a unit, but effectively the hole, so to speak, already built in the ground, the unit would effectively be placed inside of the hole.
So it's a drop-in.
It's a drop-in,
Yeah.
yes.
That's something.
Relative to swimming pools in Atherton, this proposed swim spa is relatively small in scale at about 7 feet wide by 16-ish feet long. And as I mentioned before, it has a depth of about 4.5 feet at its deepest point. So unlike a variance, special structures permits have their own set of findings. One, that the request for exception to the standard will not negatively impact neighboring properties with respect to privacy and view. As detailed in the staff report, staff believes this finding can be met given the location of the swim spa related to the surrounding properties, its corner lot position, and the substantive landscaping that would be required before this property is finalized for certificate of occupancy. Secondly, the finding is that the proposed exception to the standard needs to meet all other development standards or restrictions, in which case, as I mentioned previously, the swim spa does meet and or exceed all other setback and locational standards. And then lastly, that the permit itself is found to be consistent with objectives of the general plan. And again, for the reasons as outlined in the report, staff does believe that that finding can be made and is recommending approval of the application. So I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. We have some additional graphics on the details of the swim spa. If you're interested, I can pull those up as well. PDF. Here we go. So you can see in the top right corner, that's the unit that would drop into the hole, so to speak, prefabricated, made of steel.
Are the pumps against the house underneath the
Yes.
the 8-foot space?
Yes.
Okay. Anything else?
Nothing else that I'd like to add. Happy to answer any questions.
Got a question?
I have a few questions, actually.
Yes.
How deep is this swim spa going to be?
About 4.5 feet.
4.5 feet, thank you. So are we considering that, by what you said, Stephanie, that the 8 feet from the entrance to the house to the swim spa, would that satisfy then the code requirement of 8 feet that we were talking about?
It would on the front end of the spa.
Mhm.
What we are asking for consideration for tonight is the side of the spa, effectively,
The side right against
this
the
side,
house.
this part right here. If you can see the mouse moving,
Mm-hmm.
this is the side of the accessory structure that is less than 8 feet
Right,
from the main
right, right
residence.
down here.
Right, and that's a fixed window there? Is that?
Yes, it is. It's a fixed window, it does not open.
So the pictures I had, which were concerning to me when I first saw them and when I looked out there, didn't show any fencing at all. The drawings that we have don't show fencing. The plans that I saw didn't have fencing on it. The ones you forwarded to me later did. So is that a later ad, or is that?
It's a standard building code requirement for any swimming pool to have some type of enclosure.
Yeah.
There's a couple ways that you can do it. They weren't shown on these plans, as we wouldn't be approving the actual permit to construct the pool, but just the location of it. So the detail of the fencing would be required as part of the building permit submittal phase, should the commission approve the location of the pool at tonight's meeting.
Otherwise, it's just a short bocce court right now, so, yeah, okay, all right.
Can I ask a question? So do we need, under the code, 8 feet on each side of the pool? And because this one side that is 1 foot from the structure would be the exception?
That's correct.
Okay, and so it doesn't explicitly state that apparently in the code with, or what it does not explicitly state is types of accessory structures?
Right.
So then are we to follow the letter of the code, or are we allowed some discretion in terms of interpretation?
Well, from a matter of practice and policy, we will be following the letter of the code. And as I believe I mentioned in the staff report, the 8-foot distance requirement from a main residence to any accessory building or structure, whether that be a guest house or a cabana or a swimming pool, is not, there's no differentiation between the type of unit. The intent, from my understanding from a planning perspective, as to why that 8-foot distance requirement was set in place to begin with at the time that the ordinance was adopted, was primarily due for fire access purposes. One could make the argument that really the focus on those conversations were fire access purposes around buildings or structures above ground. But again, there's no point in our ordinance now that distinguishes between different types of accessory buildings or structures. It categorizes all of them as the same.
And the review by the fire marshal, was that, what parameters are established for that review? Does the fire marshal review the ordinance vis-a-vis how the plans propose that the pool be set in the ground, or does he or she just look at it from a purely safety perspective in terms of egress and potential for fire hazard?
So the Menlo Park Fire Department has their own set of applicable ordinances that they would be reviewing this plan set against. They would not be reviewing this plan set against the zoning ordinance or the development standards that are outlined in the staff report, such as setbacks or locational distances. Because this pool was ancillary to the main residence or main house building permit plans, they effectively already did that review for the location of this. And in my conversations with them, as well as, I should note, the building department have stated that the plans as proposed, I mean, there may be some tweaks in the details, but they would be supported. And they're not concerned on the construction of this accessory structure in its proposed location from any building code or safety perspective.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Would we be looking at this or treating this differently if this were to be set as an inside pool?
If the swimming pool was to be covered, if the roof was to extend out and that fixed glass wall that we were discussing before was to be removed, and this was just part of the main residence, the planning commission would not be looking at this item at all.
That's significant, okay. Any other questions?
Yeah, so does the pool share the foundation wall then? What's the relationship there?
It does, and I'd like to have the project
Okay.
architect give you more detail on the structure, or excuse me, the engineering component of how the foundation was designed.
And then the other question I had was, I was surprised to see that it's all almost finished as far as in case. I was wondering why this is coming to the planning commission now after it looks like it's already been in place.
The building permit set of plans, the master set of plans, did include this swim spa. When the planning department was requested to review the set of plans, the request was made strictly for the main residence, and I believe the detached garage and tennis court. This particular component of the master development plan was not specified, so there was no comment made. And then when the permit was submitted for specifically the swim spa, then it was brought to the attention that it did not comply with this one particular provision of the zoning ordinance.
Do we know why that happened in that order? Or maybe I'll find out in a minute.
Well, because a permit, the town of Atherton requires permit applications for every structure or building on a site. So most development sites have, they can have anywhere from 1 to 10 different kinds of building permits. And when in the plan routing process, we are specifically requested to review whatever permits have been submitted for. And there was no permit submitted for the swimming pool.
Got it.
And that's why the timing is as it is to
Okay.
date.
All right, well, that's no worries. Any other questions? Okay, then I'll go ahead and open up this session, the public comment section, and we'll hear from the applicant first, or applicant's representative, whomever comes up first.
Hi, my name is Paul Warner with Sage Modern. I am the project architect. I think Stephanie did a great job of explaining what the situation is, how this integrates with the house. I think one comment was about the foundation. If you could you flip to the 3D image that shows the foundation? This is as was stated, it's a prefabricated swim spa. It holds itself on its own structure. It will be sitting on a slab. I think if you look at this image, I kind of stripped away everything but the foundation that's there. It was engineered for all of this. It's going to sit on the slab. I think you can see those right in the center, those kind of 4 or 5 brown strips. That's the leveling aspect of it, but it's sitting on a slab that's supported by 6 piers that are drilled 24 feet deep into the earth. So it's a pier and grade beam foundation. So it basically sets down into that, and yes, the wall on the right is supporting the house, but it's also supporting this. All of that had been engineered and contemplated by the structural engineer for the loads. So the reason the swim spa is here is that the applicant wanted to have something that was more sheltered, and we wanted to maintain more open space in the overall site of the property and keep this more tucked in, a warmer place to be able to get in and out of the spa, and just a more discreet location than if we had moved it further away from the house and had more structures and more things around it. We thought that this was a more discreet location and one that wouldn't impact anybody else on it from anywhere else outside the site. But as I said, I think Stephanie gave a good overview on what we were looking for. And I'm happy to answer any other questions.
Any other questions? I've got to understand a little bit of sequencing of the requests, because actually, unfortunately for the project, is that this piece is coming in late.
It is.
Yeah. So what's the story on that from your perspective?
So we submitted the overall. This is the first project we've done in Atherton. We submitted the whole thing. We did get comments on other aspects of this, and we didn't realize that we thought that when everything would be submitted to planning with the pool and shown on the overall site plan, that those comments would have come up at that time. And we didn't understand that a specific permit had to be pulled for that. We waited for that to come in until we had some more specific details on exactly how the pool was going to be fabricated, so that we would have a better technical submittal. We thought that it had gone through all of the planning in one shot. And no comment to us meant approved.
Okay.
I guess.
And you just thought that the later verification would be the fact that the pump was the right pump and the.
Exactly. We thought it was the building technical submittal, not a planning submittal. And
Got it.
we had comments from the other ones, but those were also permits that we submitted at that time. We didn't understand the distinction between the two.
Okay.
So otherwise, we would have brought it up at the time and be happy to either do this process or do something else
Right.
at the planning stage.
And what was your thinking on the original design without any kind of fencing around it in the drawings?
No, that was always the case. It is it has a motorized cover and it has a removable fence, which is per Town of Atherton and the building code requirements for a fence is to have it's a 4-foot high mesh
Right.
fence that would be placed around it, and that was always there. It just was shown on the technical submittal with the dash line all the way around it.
Okay.
So
So a couple things, so I'm thinking about it, the first time I saw the plan, I was worried about the safety of it. Now I'm worried about the safety from a different perspective.
Okay.
All right, so the fence on the far end of the pool, away from the bedroom sliding door,
Mhm.
how far is that away from the edge of the pool?
It's right at the edge of the pool.
That's right, that's what it looks like on the map.
Mhm.
How far is the fence on the side of the pool, the removable fence on the side of the pool?
It's about 4 feet.
Okay,
So there's a walkway along the side of the pool inside the fence.
right. Okay, so the only thing that comes to mind in the back of my head is there's only two ways out of that pool. So you either jump in one side and hit your head on the window by the bedroom, or whatever that room is on the
The
side.
great room?
Great room.
Yeah.
Or you hit the fence on the end. So you've got 4 feet on one side of the pool and 8 feet, or a little over 8 feet on the other end of the pool. So you've got two sides to get out of there if any emergency happens. Which is the other reason why there's 8 feet a requirement around a pool. This is somebody, not only for fire to get there and pull somebody out, as well as fire to get there for any other reason that happened. I like the fact that the design is going to be better for neighbors, and I like the fact that the submittal was honestly the way that you thought it was. I'm still not comfortable with the safety element of it. All right, any other, that's all the questions I have. Any other questions?
Yeah, I'll ask about the cover. When the cover is on and someone tripped and fell onto it, is it substantially fixed all the way around? Would they slip under the cover, or would they just be on top of it and then go?
Oh, they would just be on top of it.
And they
Yeah,
could just
so it
crawl
is
off.
an ASTM safety cover. That's one. So in the checklist, you need two of about 6 or 7 different safety features.
Mhm.
You can pick kind of any two. Some of them are alarms on a door, anything leading to it. One of them is a closable safety cover. Another one would be the removable fence. So both of those things comply with that. So yes, if somebody were to get on it, they could roll off of it as well.
Okay, so someone that's in the pool, when the cover is open, is deliberately in the pool and
Mhm.
wants to get out, does the fence around it hamper that exit?
No, they can walk right up the side. There's steps that go up the side, and they can step right out onto that 4-foot walkway.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Okay, that's good enough too. So let me follow on question. Follow-on question then.
I'm sorry.
So I'll go back to one of my original concerns.
Mm-hmm.
And it's triggered by the removable nature of the fence on the end of the pool, on the far end of the pool, away from the sliding glass doors.
Mm-hmm.
So when I first saw this plan, I envisioned somebody who's not regularly there, or somebody who's regularly there that's not in the best of condition, walking down the side of the house and taking a right at the end of the wall and walking into the pool.
Okay.
All right, which was the reason that just matter-of-factly, I just looked at that and I said, bad design. All right, so now with I was comfortable with the idea of the fence, but I'm not as comfortable about the idea of a removable fence on that end.
Okay.
All right, so I'm thinking about a kid who sees the pillar on the side of the house and the end of the wall.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, being an advocate of anti-gravity myself during my youth, that would be a natural cutoff ending up in the pool. So, for what it's worth, that's not enough safety in my mind on that end.
Okay.
So I know it could be part of the code, but it's also something that, from a standpoint of ongoing safety, it just seems like a mistake. But that's just my own comment to you for what it's worth.
Okay, yeah, no, I think we absolutely can look at that and talk it over with the client as well, and kind of contemplate that on our side as well.
Okay. All right, any other questions?
No.
Okay, thank you. All right, anyone else to speak? Going once? All right, going twice, 3 times. We'll close the public hearing, bring it back to the commission for discussion and action as appropriate.
As you do it, just if I may
Yeah.
jump in, as you do it, I always find it helps, and we haven't met for a while, but just to go back to the findings
Right.
and kind of work,
Right.
if that's a good starting
Yeah.
point, might be useful.
Yeah, so here's where I am on this. I think this is a good example of just sort of crossing paths in the night on the process a little bit. So I'm willing to sort of be a little bit more lenient on the outcome because of that, provided we feel like we can get a safe outcome as a result of it. So, you know, I'm leaning towards being okay with this, with the idea that somebody needs to really look at some of the safety aspects around the pool when it's not in use.
Well, surely the owner wouldn't want some child to fall in there
Yeah.
and drown, so
Right.
if they discuss it
Yeah.
further from the aspect that we've discussed,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
would probably be sufficient.
Yeah, I don't need anything to be added to the motion or anything. I just want to go on record that we got to figure out how to
Yeah.
make sure that we don't
Good
get
point.
a late proposal like this, so that the person isn't surprised by what they have to apply for. And I'm sure everybody was saying exactly what they thought they were saying and not speaking the same language. And that goes back to the idea of multiple different environments, asking different questions and getting different answers. So I get that, but this one is too late in the process.
And I wonder if it had been part of the process early on, would another alternative been chosen?
Yeah.
Or would the town have said, no, you need to rethink this, it's just not, it really does not comply, which is obviously why we're here. But I think there are good reasons for
Right.
those 8-foot parameters. I feel uncomfortable about the safety hazards inherent in this kind of.
Yeah, I don't know that we can
So-
actually make a finding on that. That's
Right.
the issue.
Right.
So so this is where ordinance versus the reality gets to be two separate worlds. From an ordinance standpoint, we'll be looking at this from the exception of is it going to be impactful for the various reasons that staff says it isn't, which is, I believe, is accurate.
Right.
And then from the other standpoint, if we read about a kid falling into the pool, we'll all feel like, well, we had a chance and we didn't do anything about it. But from a standpoint from a planning commission standpoint, we're kind of bound by is this okay given the design and given the ordinances around the safety of the removable fence and things like that, and it applies with all that, and we don't think it's going to affect anybody, adversely in the neighborhood. In fact, it might be better,
Right.
because if you had a real pool outside of the area, it's way noisier, and everybody talks about the pumps and everything else, and so,
So, I'm uncomfortable with this on a number of fronts.
Right.
Safety, obviously, that you guys have been pretty detailed about. And I think that would be our number one concern as far as the future of this project. Where it currently is, I'm really uncomfortable with the timing of it coming before us now after it's already been kind of set. And I know that the architect said this location was chosen because they want to keep some open space, but we're talking about 112-foot
yeah,
swim spa
Right.
that I don't think leaves a tremendous footprint on a 44,000 square foot lot. That has nothing to do with, I'm just kind of playing down that argument as to
Right,
where it needs to be
right.
in that location. That certainly is not one of the findings, but just an issue that I was kind of questioning, along with the timing of this coming before us now after it's already in. I'm really not comfortable with the, with all respect, Stephanie, the loophole of the 8 feet setback, because it's 8 feet from the front door, but it's not 8 feet from the building, and that works into the safety that you guys have
Right.
already detailed. And I'm super uncomfortable with the fact that with this size lot in this location, that, and we haven't been faced with anything like this before, that we might be setting a dangerous precedent by allowing this when there's so much space on that lot where this small swim spa could be relocated. So, you know, I would just throw those out there to the commission to get your feedback on those and educate me. But those are the things that I immediately thought about. And those are the things that I am the most uncomfortable with on this project.
It's valid, Paul.
Yeah, I did also have a concern about possibly setting.
So when I first was envisioning this and saw the plans, I've been familiar with other properties where they had a swimming pool and a foundation share walls. And those places were eventually condemned. And I was imagining this is gonna be a nightmare. But I'm satisfied with the plan and the explanation of the foundation and the support and the fact that it's a drop-in unit. It's essentially just a shell for that unit, and that unit's gonna be, I guess, supporting most of the water
Yeah,
pressure.
it's a-
All that water-bearing weight
Yeah.
is held by the unit
Right.
and not necessarily, but, so the design is fine. I don't have, that's what I thought I was gonna have a problem with. And that's the least of my worries outside of the ones I just noted. So that's my contribution to what we're talking about here.
So let's talk about finding number 2 for a minute, because number 1 is proposed swimming spa does not negatively impact neighbors' properties with respect to privacy and view. So that's in my mind, there's no question about that. As a matter of fact, it helps, it probably improves it compared to what it could be on another thing. So number 2 is the proposed swimming spa and pool spa comply with other development standards, restrictions, or limitations for the proposed building or structure. So that has to do with the foundation, and what does that have to do with?
That has to do with all of the other zoning development standards that also are applicable beyond the standard that's being requested for a quote exception. So the other setbacks, the front, the rear, the side, the height, the width, all of those things.
So the third one has to do with the, so I'm less clear on how the third one applies. Then, so granting the special permit is consistent with the objective of the general plan. So tell me about that one.
So if the commission found that the request for an exception from the development standard of the 8-foot locational distance requirement from the accessory structure to the pool did not support other established objectives, goals, or policies of the general plan, then that could be a basis for not approving the application.
How many and what are the other accessory buildings
On the site,
on the site?
there's a detached garage, which is an accessory building. There's a tennis court, which is an accessory structure.
There's about 75 tons of cement on that court.
There's a few water features, those are
Mhm.
accessory
Mhm.
structures. There's, I believe, a generator pad, that's an accessory structure as well. I believe that's it.
Yeah,
And they
the-
all comply with the setbacks?
Correct.
Okay, and so if the ordinance does not treat accessory structures separately or independently, or describe any, based on its unique circumstances, and all other accessory structures comply, I just have a question as to how this became an outlier.
It sounds like everybody thought that they knew with the process, so the city the town process was, we'll look at it as the exceptions come forward. And the applicant thought that, this plan submitted the way it was with a pool on it, although looking at the plan size I had, I couldn't spot the pool until I was highlighted. So that's the other, so they're feeling like, well, we submitted the plan, and they said yes, and now we'll just go ahead and verify that the technical aspects of the things that we actually build are okay, and that has something to do with, is the foundation correct? Okay, check. Is the tennis court the correct size and correct, and is the setback on the way we did the garage back checked? Now we gotta do the pool, oh, not a check yet. So that was the thinking, that's what I was picking up from the presentation, is basically,
Sir.
one side thought it was overall approved, and they just had to make sure that the subcomponents were done in compliance. And on our side, it was like, yes, the tentative plan was approved, now these other components can be talked about as you actually come and get them.
But that sounds like then the pool was considered not an accessory structure from the beginning.
It's not, well, technically in their mind, it probably wasn't, because it was part of the building. Which is also an interpretation that was, you know, but that, you're right, that's the way it was, because it was built into the foundation, it was part of it, they were thinking it was part of the building.
So I have a question for staff real quick. So on finding 2, with the proposed swim pool spa complying with standards, restrictions, limitations, and you have setbacks here, so it complies, according to staff, with the setbacks with that 8 feet from the door to the pool. Is that part of that setback compliance that we're looking at?
No, so this finding is intended to address for any application that's requesting a special structures permit from a standard, that thing that's requesting the special structures permit complies with all other setback standards. So you've got your one standard that's requesting exception, which is why we're here tonight, and then you've got a series of other associated standards. Does the request comply with that series of other associated standards? And we have found that yes, it does comply with that series of other associated standards, such as front, rear, and side setbacks.
For the entire project?
For the swim spa before you tonight.
Okay, I got you, okay.
So 3 out of 4 sides comply.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, accessory structures effectively have 4 development standards. They have a front setback requirement, they have a rear setback requirement, they have side setback requirements, and then they have, from property lines, and then they have I'll call it a setback standard from the main house. And so this request is meeting 3 of the 4 by right, and it's that 4th that's triggering the need for the exception request before you tonight via a special structures permit. Excuse me.
Well, I'm not happy with the way the process worked, okay? So, from the standpoint of precedence, or not precedence, I think that the way we handle the precedence is make sure that in the future, when something pops up like this, we talk about the requirements up front, and that it's something that has to be worked on up front, and we do it early. And so I guess so from that standpoint, of all the things I think that caused the issue on tonight, that's the number one. We had 2 different processes in our head talking the same language, not realizing we didn't have the same process going. I'm comfortable that the safety element is being addressed, and you know, obviously no homeowner's going to want to have a problem on the site, because you know, even if you know the liability alone would make that a deterrent, as well as the life itself. And I like the fact that it's not intrusive to neighbors. So, you know, that ultimately does this comply with my sort of ultimate truth test on planning, which is does it provide, you know, is it a good neighbor thing to do? So the pump will be closer to the house than any other pump we have, and it'll be less noisy, and you know, and people aren't going to be jumping into a 10-foot pool off a diving board. So I can go ahead and make the motion, although I need the applicant to really do a hard look on the safety particularly on the edge, on the far end. All right, I'm ready to make a motion. Ready? Any other questions? So I move the planning commission approve the structure permit at 355 Stedwick Way based on the findings and the reasons enumerated in the staff report, subject to the conditions listed in the staff special structures permit certificate to allow for the construction of a swimming pool spa be less than 8 feet from the main residence. The motion, is there a second? All right. All right, there we go. All right, so there doesn't need to be another motion if you don't want to. If you want to take it back and may continue discussions, or how do you want to end this? Anybody else ready for? I guess anybody else ready for a motion?
Can there be a caveat on an approval? Or have to do something about the safety that we suggest or someone else does?
You can make a motion to approve and a further recommendation to amend the draft special structures permit to add an additional condition. If you felt that condition held your basis of substantiating one of the 3 findings, it's an option.
Well, that's an option, but I leave it up to somebody else to word that.
Well, yeah, but I don't know what we're getting yourselves into on that.
It does become a little bit difficult, and again, if you look at the required findings, I think we're having trouble tying it to something, and I feel like that's frustrating, because usually we have something we can work with.
Right.
I think there's a little less to work with here, unfortunately.
Right.
Okay.
The only thing I would remind you is, it will be subject to building codes, safety codes, you know, all those standards. There's a whole host of things that are beyond what the town requires, and all of those requirements would need to be met.
There is a safety code.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and there are a ton of things that have nothing to do with the Atherton Municipal Code, and all of those things are still in effect and would not be in any way changed by what you're doing.
So if we approved it, the safety situation might be resolved somewhere else along the way?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it would need to, if a building permit was issued, it would need to comply with the minimum. Safety codes are integrated into the Uniform Building and California Building Code.
Okay.
Safety-related code provisions, I'll say.
The one safety element that is better than some scenarios on a pool
Mhm.
is that it's closer to the house and more visible.
Well, it's only
It's
40
visible
feet.
off the great room, it's visible off the bedroom, it's visible
Yeah.
off the walkway on the way in. So if somebody's stuck out there, somebody's gonna be able to see it if they're anywhere in the vicinity.
Yeah.
And the house is see-through all the way through.
And
So-
the cover is rigid, so that it's usually
Yeah,
there.
yeah.
I'll second.
All right, moved and seconded. All right, ready, any other questions? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
Opposed?
All right, 2-2.
Oh, gosh.
All right, so, at this point, we have a couple of different options. One is that somebody can make a motion to deny, and that might pass because at the borderline sounding of everything for. And the other would be to recommend that staff go back and work with the applicant. But it's more likely that we need to make our decision here so they can appeal it to the town council.
And you can have more discussion on the matter if
Right.
you want to understand why some people are so
Yeah,
uncomfortable
we
with
could
it. You absolutely
continue.
could continue.
We could
having that
continue until
conversation.
next meeting, but I don't know if that's gonna change anything in terms of what the applicant. For the applicant, you've got a choice of you may be able to get a decision tonight and it's appealable, or we can push it back for another meeting for discussion. So, depending on what your preference is, we could probably comply with that preference.
If we were to modify the design of the, I realize that's not part of this, but modify the design of the fencing, put a permanent fence across the front, like a 4-foot glass rail across the front and a permanent gate and fence.
Yeah, but, let's put it this way, if you're amenable to that, we would continue it, and then you guys work it out, and come back before us to be talked about it. That's how it would work. So it would not be
It
something
would
we
still
just.
be back before you though.
Yes, it
so
would
you
still
have to
be,
grant
it'd
that.
still have to come back.
Would have the ability, and you have before, to sort of impose these conditions, like if they're saying, hey, we'll do this, you absolutely could accept that now and grant it based on that
Okay,
condition.
all right, so that,
If you felt like that change that they're offering right now made it so you could make all the findings, then you absolutely could vote to approve it right now, because you felt like that
Oh, you two
changed and
did.
all the findings were now met.
All right, well, then one of you two tell me if that's worth it.
I mean, if, I can explain a little bit,
Yeah,
in a little
not
more
yet,
detail.
Yeah,
but,
I'm not public comment yet.
Oh, sorry.
I was sort of let you slip in there, but I was not going to continue too long.
Sorry.
I don't know, I'm not comfortable that, and I understand that, there might have been some innocent misunderstandings. But I just feel pretty strongly that
Yeah.
it's important that all of the aspects be considered at the same time.
Right, yeah.
Because it provides an opportunity for future applicants to say the same thing, but really intend to squeeze in a different design that requires
Right.
a variance or a special.
All right, so let's somebody make a motion to deny them.
Okay, I move that the planning commission not approve the special structures permit at 355 Civic Way based on the findings and for the reasons enumerated in the staff report.
Yeah, you don't base it on the findings, you just move them, right?
So I think you're saying that you were unable to make the required findings,
Right.
and as a result,
Yes.
we vote to not approve it.
And did we talk about pushing it out to the next meeting and
No,
having a
when
fifth person?
If we do the denial, then
Okay.
they'll be able to appeal it.
And to be honest, it would probably accomplish the
Right.
goals faster,
Right.
because then it'll go straight to council. and
Right.
They'll be
Right.
heard a little quicker.
And if there's any modifications by the time they get to council that's in line with what we talked about, that might solve it anyway. So it'll save time in the process.
Would you like to say something?
Do you have any recommendations?
Just a note, there was discussion about the special structures permit or variance. The findings for a special structures permit and a variance are very distinct and different from each other. The variance findings are much more complex, and the property or the request need to demonstrate a real unique physical constraint to the site that does not allow them to construct such an improvement otherwise or elsewhere on the property because of topography, trees, the various series of things could support a variance. Whereas a special structures permit, the intent of such is for deviation from standard, again, but to a much lesser severity in terms of its impact. So I just wanted to highlight that point, that the findings between the two different types of requests are quite different.
Okay, we're 2-2, so somebody do something.
I mean, if you want, you could go back through the findings. I don't know if that would help. I mean, it is always, there's a certain amount of structure that's imposed on your decision-making. And again, I love, the lawyer in me loves to tie it to the findings and what you're actually, it sort of sets forth what you're asked to look at. And I'm hearing some things that I understand that might not actually be directly tied to them. So I don't know if that helps at all, but.
So we have a motion now without a second, so Paul made a motion.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, right, so
is there a second?
is there a second on the motion?
For Paul's motion?
Joanne?
Yeah, I second it.
All right, moved and seconded, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
2 and 2.
2 and 2.
Okay.
All right, so, we can, if we leave it like that, they can still appeal, correct?
They cannot appeal.
Yeah, that's what I
No.
thought. All right.
Okay, I'll vote. Paul.
All right. Okay, good, so
We'll
we
expedite
gotta
it.
switch
That would
vote.
be better.
All right,
Do you?
Well, but there is also the option of requesting a continuance for a full commission where there could be
Right.
additional work done between staff and the applicant to refine the plans to address some of what seems to be the concerns and the lack of the ability for some of the commissioners to be able to make the findings to support the application.
Yep.
And that would be held in January.
26th or something, so.
At the
Plus
next
having the full commission
regularly
would really-
scheduled meeting.
Yeah.
And it would probably be too late to get it on the council agenda for December, so it would probably be similar timing.
Right.
about a week apart. It'd be,
So
it wouldn't be materially
Mm,
different.
that's a better.
January
Okay.
23rd, 2019.
You all right with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do it that way. So we'll go ahead and continue. I need a motion to continue. All right, so let's play, so you're keeping your vote at,
Yeah.
okay, no? All right, so it's 2-2 on the last one, so I need a motion to, I'll move that we continue the item to the meeting in January. So
Second.
that the staff and the applicant can talk through some options.
Second that.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye, see how easy that was? Opposed? None. All right, thank you. All right, thank you for the time on this, and thank you for listening to the concerns, and I know you'll address them, and we'll work things out in January. All right, thank you very much. All right, thank you for staying, and let's see, item number 4B is a special structures permit and variance on 76 Bellbrook Way. So I'll go ahead and we'll do the format the same. We'll start with the staff, and we'll open it up for public comment, and then we'll listen to everybody, then we'll close public comment, bring it back to the commission for discussion and action as appropriate. All right, let's start with the staff report.
Thank you. Okay, so tonight for the property at 76 Bellbrook Way, you have two formal requests before you tonight. The first being a special structures permit to consider two components. One, the construction of retaining walls in excess of 6 feet in height, as well as the construction of a swimming pool within the front yard setback. And the second request before you is for a variance to allow for the construction of a detached accessory building in the form of a garage within the front yard setback. So just a brief overview of the property itself. So the property at 76 Bellbrook is an upsloped lot. It has a fair amount of existing vegetation and heritage trees, about 34 heritage trees, which line primarily the front perimeter property line as well as up towards the sides leading towards the rear of the property. The lot itself is relatively irregular in shape. It's not your standard square or triangle with 90-degree angle lines, jagged lines that encompass its boundaries. The property also is bordered from starting at the front on Bellbrook Way up towards the rear, bordered on both sides by private driveways that are actually of the same parcel, which is the rear parcel to this site. We can pull up the site plan. The existing house on the property was destroyed and made uninhabitable in a fire back in about a little over a year ago in 2017. The applicant is going to be proposing a full re-site development of a new single-family home, detached garages, swimming pool, and some other ancillary accessory structures. So the components, again, before you tonight, as part of this master development scheme, we can start the discussion first with the variance component. And again, as I mentioned, the variance is requested to allow for construction of the detached garage within the front yard setback. I'm going to pull up the site plan. As I'm doing that, I just want to note the colored copies that were left for each commissioner as well as members for the public. Those are the same same plan sets that were included in your package. They're just in color, and a
Easier to
little
read.
bit easier. Excuse me.
How much of an intrusion to the setback is the garage?
Garage. So the garage is in line with the front of the main residence, so it's 60 feet from the front property line, whereas the standard requirement for an accessory building is either 120 feet from the front property line or 30 feet behind that front line of the main residence, whichever is less.
Yeah.
There. Okay. Okay. So where I'm scrolling the mouse over here is that proposed detached garage. So it's at the front right side of the property. The proposal to locate the garage in this location is tied into the overall development scheme proposed. What you see in red is the footprint of the existing home, as well as the existing driveway approach along the left-hand side of the property. As part of the redevelopment scheme, the design approach is to try to better follow the natural topography of the site, which has a slope from the back down towards the street. And it also has an angular cross slope as it goes down. It's also intended to situate buildings and structures in a lesser visually invasive location on the property than where the existing driveway, or excuse me, existing home is situated, primarily for, the neighbor over here. This site behind them is currently under development. That house is situated fairly.
We looked at that a year and a half
Yes,
ago.
we
Right.
did the subdivision, I think,
Yeah.
on that one, if
Yeah.
I'm remembering correctly. And the property over here, the house is situated up here. So
Yeah.
it's really over here to locate those buildings farther away and down into the lot.
And that house up above is relatively close to the edge of the, I could see that house from when I went to the site,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yes. The location of the proposed garage was also reviewed by our town arborist, and the determination was made that the proposed location, as well as its associated driveway approach, which is shown here in this darker gray, would not have any impact to any of the existing on-site heritage trees. So given the topography of the site, the situation of the existing building pad and driveway, and the heritage trees, which you can see kind of circled around here, all these little black dots,
Yeah,
those are all trees, and they, I mentioned, primarily follow the perimeter of the site. To situate a detached accessory structure further back, as the standard requirements would otherwise call for, could have a greater impact to the long-term preservation and health of some of those heritage trees on either side of the lot.
yeah, some of them up on a hill are not that healthy looking. Even though they meet their definition, the health of them,
Heritage
yeah.
34 heritage trees on site.
Yeah,
That all are proposed to be retained, healthy ones to be retained, specified. So again, for the reasons as outlined in the report, the topography, garage placement, consideration of situation of other existing neighboring properties, buildings and structures, staff's recommending approval of the variance. So moving on to the second component before you tonight, which is twofold as well, of the special structures permit. So we'll begin the discussion with the retaining wall component of the request. Just trying to pull up, there's a plan in here that shows, whoops, too far. The walls themselves. So the walls that are requesting to exceed the town's maximum retaining wall height of 6 feet are all associated with the driveway approach on the left-hand side of the house. Those walls are mainly located towards, I'll call it the center of the mid-center of the driveway approach, making your way up towards the rear. The reason that the request is being made at these 3 specific locations is again because of the way that the property up/cross slopes. In order to get the appropriate driveway percentage so that it's not too steep, as well as to try to minimize the amount of grading, the conceptual engineering plans would call for a wall that's in excess of 6 feet at those particular locations. The proposed driveway approach that triggers the need for these retaining walls to begin with is also trying to attempt to utilize as much of the existing driveway approach that's already there in the overall attempt at minimizing the amount of excavation and earthwork needed to serve the future proposed development scheme for the site. same as I mentioned with the garage, the town arborist has reviewed the placement of these walls that are before you tonight with the request of special structures permit, and really all of the driveway retaining walls that are 6 feet and or less in height, and made the determination that no heritage trees, existing heritage trees would be impacted by the proposed situation of these walls on the site. So the second piece of the special structures permit relates to the proposed swimming pool and its location. I'm gonna jump back to the site plan. Or maybe we'll go to the colored landscaping plan, it's a little easier to look at too. Here we go. Swimming pool being here. Here's the garage in which we just discussed. So the swimming pool is actually a bit further back, farther than the front property line, than the garage, although the way that the lot's angled at the front, there's points where the lineal distance is the same, but it visually almost appears as farther back because of the way that the lot slopes up. So specifically what the request is entailing is the location of the swimming pool. Again, swimming pool defined by town ordinance as an accessory structure thus needing to be located either 120 feet from the front property line or 30 feet behind the front line of the main house. Everything that's shaded in white on the screen is part of the main house, either at the first or second floor. And so you can see there's that square in between the pool and the detached garage. So this is part of the main house, and you can see that the swimming pool is in line locationally, distance-wise, with the front of the main house. And repeating myself again, but the location of the swimming pool and where the topography hits and the location of the existing trees would not be impacted per the opinion of our town arborist. Same conditions would apply, as I mentioned, with the garage. Again, we'll go back to the different series of findings that the commission will need to make for this special structures permit. Unlike the variance that's requested for the garage, but the similarity being that if this accessory structure was to be located farther back up in the rear of the lot where accessory structures would otherwise be required, there could be potential impact to some of those existing heritage trees, again, determined to be healthy from arborist opinion. So for those reasons, staff is recommending approval of the special structures permit both for the retaining wall heights in excess of 6 feet. I don't think I mentioned, although it's detailed in the staff report, those in excess of, in excess of 6 feet are specifically at a little over 8.5 feet, up to 9.5, a little over 9.5 feet. As well as the location of the swimming pool within the front yard setback.
And do we know the distance, linear footage of those retaining walls that are exceeding the 6 feet?
Yes. Give me a moment, please. Unless that you know offhand. Yeah, I can scale it up.
I was just curious, just to give me some perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Stephanie, the pool's 75, so if we scroll back up to the sheet with the wall, I could probably give you a comparative dimension.
Yeah, I'm gonna do my
Yeah,
own
just- I
scaling
can't
here
see
real
'em.
quick, but
The plans that we have. Small.
Yeah, scaling on these would be tough.
yeah, I mean, by rough scaling
seven-
estimates, those pieces, by rough scaling estimates, those two sections of the wall from what I'm looking at here, would be somewhere between 30 to 50 feet.
Okay.
Here we go.
I've got one other question about the
Yeah.
upper garage, the one that's,
Uh-huh.
to the, if on the plan that I'm looking at right here.
Yeah.
I'm looking at it, from the street, from the Bellbrook Way on the bottom.
Mhm.
When you back out of that garage, if you're going to leave the property, probably back out with the back of the car towards the stairs that are, those two stairs that are right there on the right.
Right here?
Yeah, so you back out and you back out to that direction.
Uh-huh.
How far is that from,
From the wall.
yeah, I'm just thinking about warning people if they don't have four-wheel drive, that it might be tougher to get out.
Well, typically the minimum backup distance for 90-degree parking industry standard is
Yeah.
24 feet.
Yeah.
Atherton doesn't have a such standard.
Right.
But if I can go back to my rough scaling estimate, if you can give me a moment, please.
It just seems a little close to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I'll bring it up with the applicant,
Okay.
and maybe we can talk about it. I think aesthetically it probably looks good, but functionally it might be a problem. Figured somebody actually hit the wrong pedal. All right, any other questions, Tom? All right, good, then I will open the public hearing, and we'll hear from the applicant or their representative.
Okay, Ken, through
Yeah.
the chair, to answer your question again, rough scaling estimate, if the width of a two-car garage is usually about 20 feet or so. The backup that I scaled from the edge of the garage to that stair is just about at 20 feet.
Yeah, it looks a little short to me. All right, we're ready for public comment and from the applicant or representative. Do you have anything to add? Yeah.
Thanks, Stephanie. Pretty much got everything there. I could only probably add, I think the garage, it's oversized. I think we're 24,
Mm.
and so from memory, we're probably 24 on the tarmac side, the darker grey piece. And we put the planting hedge at the edge of the drive between that and the building as a buffer or
Yeah,
indicator
yeah.
that you're getting close to
Yeah.
the house there.
I was more concerned about the steps on the right.
Oh, over on the right.
So you're backing up, going
Yeah.
that way,
Right.
and your beeper doesn't work because it doesn't see anything, and then you
Mhm.
just feel bump, and then
Yeah.
you're on the lower level.
Yeah.
So, for what it's worth.
For what it's, yeah, that's right. Our
Drive
landscape
down.
architect is here today, but it's a good point. And you know, we're here nice and early at
Yeah.
schematic stage.
You're tradable.
We're very tradable. That's right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you know, I can only add it's the existing house, it's an old Cliff May house that burned down, and it's a pretty aggressive cut up on up to the top northwestern side of the property, doing our best to use that pad as it exists, and then stepping that house down the hill to try and shrink away from all our neighbours that sit around as best we can. And that sort of grabbed the corner up in the top left-hand corner of the screen and pushes that side wall into what's sort of an already cut bank. So that bank's sort of coming on a slope, and we're just sort of edging back into that bank with that wall. Not sure what else I can add there. We looked at the pool up in the top right-hand corner, up off to the left, and realising it was an option between the veggie gardens below, or putting the gardens up above in the right-hand corner as we sort of moved these components around the site, and realising that was a nicer association with their living pavilion where the kitchen is, so we could come out the back and down those two steps, which we'll work with. And there's planting beds up around on the top right-hand corner there, rather than making our way all sort of down the slope to the lower terrace level where the veggie gardens could have been. And to add to Stephanie's note, we did investigate actually bringing the lower garage the driveway up around and then come up onto the right-hand side and come in through the back, switching up what the recreation suite was there at that lower level. And the driveway grade started to get too steep
Right.
for us to start to pull it up and at that point make it part of the main house. So ended up swinging out and becoming this separate piece or separate entity. On the larger site plan, and I think that's the larger green trees, the ones that are shaded dark, are going to be new big specimen trees that we're bringing to the interior of the property. One thing I know I've been working hard with my designers is that we find a lot of lots just have the heritage trees at the perimeter, and we're very hollow at the centre. So the dark green shaded trees are going to be our specimen trees, and then we start to shade back down between the next lime green shades is our lower shrubs, and we're using those to disguise and put in front of our site walls and try and blend all these elements back into that hillside as we bring the new design to play.
All right.
But, yeah, thanks.
All right, any questions? Okay, thank you. Thank you. All right, any questions of staff or comments? I went to the site and I got to walk it. The gates were open. There was a grading guy there. There was and ironically, he didn't know anything. I said, okay, whatever. It says grading on the side of the truck. I figured you would know a lot about this. But I mentioned that I was on planning commission. That may have just made him less interested. But I felt like the retaining walls were definitely required on the site even now. There's hills and spots where some of these designations is slipping, and it's going to get worse, and the trees are leaning because of it. So it'll shore up a lot of things on that hill, not the least of which maybe the neighbor behind you. So I was comfortable with all that. The lower garage seems okay to me. It doesn't, I don't have a problem with the way it's going to impact anyone. And the property, it has a special shape. It has an irregular shape, so that makes me feel comfortable that it's not special granting of any special thing. It's not a square rectangular lot, so we make accommodation for that on a regular basis, and it's well situated, and it does help preserve the slope of the property, so I'm comfortable with the presentation. Yeah, I would work on that back out spot.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, totally agree.
All right.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll see if I can make a second motion. And any other comments?
Nope.
I'd like to get one passed tonight.
We'll try.
Yeah, you guys will probably vote just to make sure that somebody else gets credit. All right, you have two separate motions, so I'll take one of them, all right? We'll share the load. I move that the planning commission approve the variance of 76 Bellbrook Way based on the findings and the reasons enumerated in the staff report, subject to the conditions listed in the variance certification to allow for the construction of a detached garage within the front yard setback.
Second.
Moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Anybody else want to take the second part?
I move that the planning commission approve the special structures permit at 76 Bellbrook Way based on the findings and for the reasons enumerated in the staff report, subject to the conditions listed in the draft special structures permit certificate to allow retaining walls up to 9 feet 7 inches in height and the construction of a swimming pool within the front yard setback.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Just before we take the vote, I'll officially close the public hearing. All right, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None? Very good, so that's where you do it. All right, thank you. Thank you for waiting too. All right. You're welcome to come back next month to see how that thing's worked out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for waiting. All right. New business. Item 5A is the discussion of applicant general plan update amendments to the noise element. There's not much of my trouble playing now, so I felt good about that.
So it's been a few months since we brought you one of our recommended amended general plan elements as part of the comprehensive general plan update that we're undertaking this year and into next year. So tonight before you is the proposed amended noise element. Just a refresher for the commission and anybody in the public who's watching. The town is undertaking a comprehensive update to our general plan, less the housing element. So we're updating all of the state mandated required elements to a general plan to primarily assure compliance with the specific guidelines that the state of California states every jurisdiction's general plan elements must contain. Our last comprehensive general plan update was 2002, so the regulations have changed since then. No changes to land use, so no associated changes within any of the other elements are
Speaking of noise.
proposed, exactly.
It's about
So-
70 decibels, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
so getting into noise, so what is the noise element? So a noise element is intended to assure that a city or town limits the exposures of their community to excessive noise levels in sensitive areas and at sensitive times of the day. A noise element is required by the state to detail as necessary their local situation and offer solutions to any identified noise issues. The process to create the noise element included a survey of the community to determine the types, locations, and extent of noise. We did, for this particular element, utilize the services of an outside professional consultant, specifically an acoustical consulting firm, helped us as staff prepare the draft element before you tonight. What this acoustical consulting firm primarily did was help create the noise measurement program that's required to establish existing noise conditions within the town, as well as projected future noise conditions of the town based off of both our land uses, which aren't intended to change. So there was no future build out, so to speak, analyzed from a land use perspective. But what it also does is project those future noise conditions as it relates to future associated traffic and impacts, in which we'll get into that momentarily, because those levels are projected to change, unlike land use. So in summary, the noise measurement program that was performed by the acoustical consulting firm did identify that the major sources of noise in town are along our busy arterial and local streets. There's certain roadway classification system that describes different streets based on their capacity or how many cars drive down it. So for example, Middlefield Road within Atherton is an arterial street, which is a bit of a higher level type street, whereas a street such as Lloyden Park would be a local street because the capacity is much less. And those criteria are defined by the state of California, and we have just gone in and applied that classification to all of our streets within the town boundaries. So going back, that the major sources of noise on those arterial streets, also including of course Middlefield, as I mentioned, El Camino Real, and as well as our Caltrain railroad corridor. Those are our primary noise sources. The town's also, of course, affected by noise from the freeways, which, although are outside the town boundaries, do impact our noise levels. We have intermittent noise from airlines that travel overhead, across through town boundaries, as well as noise generated from our schools, our parks, and our athletic fields. So the amended noise element in comparison to the existing noise element has done a few things. As I mentioned, it now includes both background information and specific purpose and relation text to other elements as mandated by the state of California, which our current noise element was lacking. It also categorizes different land uses within town, which there's not a huge variety, with obviously residential being our primary land use, in different ranges, at levels that are defined as normally acceptable, conditionally acceptable, normally unacceptable, and unacceptable. What this does is helps us with future projects. Is part of any environmental review, there's a noise component to it. We can analyze potential noise impacts of any future project in relation to our established now noise criteria, to make a determination if that project would negatively impact the town from a noise perspective, and if which then either mitigation needs to be created or implemented through that project to meet our targeted now general plan levels. Those are I think the biggest components of a noise element that impact the town on a functional level. The other, I think I'll call it substantive change to the draft element that our current noise element lacks are some maps or figures. These figures, what they do is they outline both the existing noise levels within the town as well as the projected future noise contours. And I should mention the future noise contours, those levels are modeled off of future traffic projections. We're lucky because the town is undergoing a separate process of a town-wide traffic study, and part of that traffic study work, unrelated to the general plan update, established existing traffic levels and future traffic projections. So we were able to take that data being done with that study and fold it into our noise element. So that was very helpful. Yes, thrifty, financially conscientious. So with that, I'm happy to answer any questions on any of the proposed amendments to the noise element. I should take a step back, and as we've done with other elements, we've identified sort of what's existing text that's carrying over, we propose to carry over, and what's new text that we propose to add in that our current element does not contain.
Is there anything, we've highlighted noise, traffic noise factors on the edge of town.
Yes.
Is there anything on the edge of town that we know of that could be a noise factor into the town? I mean, like, we don't, so these get more complex when you have shopping centers or bars or concert halls or outside, theaters and things like that. For us, it's pretty contained here, but if somebody opens up a bar on the corner of whatever to whatever, then the noise element theoretically is impacted even though it's not in the city. So is there anything that we need to look at just like beyond the fringe, like we did on the traffic?
No, so when another if we're speaking outside of our jurisdictional boundaries.
Just barely outside.
Just
yeah.
barely outside, but outside, and
Yeah.
outside our jurisdiction, those, for the most part, are gonna require some type of environmental document to be prepared
Okay.
associated with the project. At which point, we, as a potentially affected agency, get notified of that. We then are given the ability, as any other member of the public or community public member, to review and comment on that. By establishing these contours, should Project X in their environmental document note that they will project noise levels of Y,
Right.
and our adopted general plan noise element says, well, Y is in our unacceptable range,
Right.
then we comment on that, and that begins the conversation with that jurisdiction on that project on how you're gonna mitigate that, hopefully. That's always the process
So
to
the
acceptable town standards.
It's like the San Carlos Airport type
Yeah.
thing. Okay. Okay. All right.
Surfair,
Right. Yeah.
which
Well,
we've integrated into this
Mhm.
to the greatest extent that we can, in terms of policy, to
Yeah.
address any future issues that have already been identified within the town.
I spoke at one of their one of the meetings of the county level on Surfair. Yeah. Not representing us, but representing the guy that has the former Surf airplanes fly through his atrium every morning and every night. I mean, literally the planes. I think they use our peak at our roofs as the guidance in the plane. Okay, all right. So that covers anything that would happen that would be special case. Now, there's a slight industrial area over beyond on the Fair Oaks area, anything like that, gyms and things like that. Okay, cool. That makes sense. All right, so what the process of this will be, we'll bring it back and we'll be talking it through and learning more about it on at least 2 more times, right?
Yes, so tonight then, I would ask if the commission had any specific comments on this administrative draft, anything that you'd like us as staff to flush out or integrate into the next round of an administrative draft, that would be great. In terms of next steps, after we move to the next item on the agenda, the commission will have reviewed administratively in a study session format all of the revised draft elements. The next step would be for the town to hold a community meeting to talk about all of the draft elements. We would then integrate any comments received at that community meeting into another round of administrative draft revised elements and bring those back to the commission, along with the required environmental documentation that is required when you do update a general plan. Likely it will be in the form of a mitigated negative declaration or negative declaration, because we're not changing any land uses or really the fabric or blueprint of the town.
I think it's nice that you arranged this little demonstration of unwanted noise at the beginning of our discussion on this very topic.
Yes, that was a
And
great
It's all part of the
meditative,
I
Yeah.
see here on page 6, it says the Atherton Fair Oaks Quiet Zone was established by the town in June of 2016.
Yes.
Now, is that just a request we made to the railroad? Do they even know they're not supposed to ring their bell and honk their horn?
Yes, they know.
Is there anything that can be done about that? It's just something we have to live with because they choose to do that?
Yeah, there's constant facilitation between the adopted town committees and liaisons with the jurisdicting
So it's
bodies
not really a
of the
hard and
California.
fast law, then it's just a courtesy?
They actually conflict.
Yeah.
They worked really hard to make it a quiet zone and put in a ton of effort, and it was granted.
Yeah.
But they actually have superseding regulations for safety that they have to
Right.
sound a certain amount.
Mhm.
So it
Like,
should never have
what
been
is the point of a
designated?
quiet zone?
Yeah.
Right.
So we simultaneously have both. And
Yeah.
yeah, it is what it is.
Okay.
Yeah, so when they come
and
up
it
to
will stay
an
that way.
intersection, they have to blow the horn by one law.
Yeah, by
And
one
then-
law, and then by the other, they have to not sound their horn.
Well, the only thing that might preclude is excessive use of the horn.
Yes,
beyond a certain
it
point.
takes out the
Yes.
discretionary
Yeah,
use of
right,
the horn.
right,
Yeah.
okay. All right, well, this is actually easier to read than most of these I've
Oh,
read,
yeah.
by a lot, by about 500%, maybe 5,000%.
Wow.
You know, well, it had little things like bullets that highlighted the points,
Yeah.
rather than 12 paragraphs to say the same thing.
Okay.
Even the
Yeah.
choice of font.
Yeah, everything was very easy to read about it. And
Yeah.
the charts were easy, and I like the breakdown on page 4. I think that lays it out really, really well. I mean, it was amazingly clear compared to some of the I've read.
Okay.
Yeah, it was really not nearly as helpful to go to sleep with as some of them I've read. So it's good. So do you need direction from us other than that?
No, I think I've heard.
Anything else? I mean, if anybody comes with anything else, just contact staff direct. But I didn't see anything in it that I felt was missing or needed added. It was
Well
all-
done.
Yep, it was very, very crisp and clean.
Mhm.
All right, item 5B has to do with the discussion of Atherton's general plan update again, amendments of the circulation element.
All right. So without repeating too much of the background that I just made mention of, jumping right into what a circulation element is. So it's the town's transportation plan, and it's also, we use a circulation element as a strategy at addressing infrastructure needs for the circulation of people and energy and storm drainage and other infrastructure type things throughout our town. There's been some relatively recent legislation, and I say recent, mean since 2002 when our element was last updated, that has also driven the way that a lot of cities in California, particularly in the peninsula, approach their circulation and transportation elements, and the type of solutions that are now available that weren't back in 2002. Again, not super applicable in Atherton because we have primarily single-family residential, but in that same right, there's elements within some of this legislation, such as the Complete Streets Act, as well as the Global Warming Solutions Act, that we have to, by state mandate or the general plan guidelines, integrate somehow into our circulation element. And we have done that with this administrative draft to the extent that is required by law and then / applicable to our town and its demographic and layout. So the circulation element lays out circulation throughout the town, both in streets, pedestrian pathways, bikeways. In creating this administrative draft element, we took a lot of base data from either other town adopted plans, such as our bicycle and pedestrian master plan, as well as that traffic study that I mentioned previously, and integrated in so that the town's regulating and implementing either documents or policy documents are allowing for this internal consistency. So, for example, the maps that have been now proposed as part of the circulation element that our current circulation element doesn't have, it maps out the streets by color scheme and by that classification system that I made mention of previously. It also does the same type of approach for existing and proposed bicycle pathways, as well as pedestrian and other pathways. It's an important component because the general plan circulation element, both its policies and its street classification systems, can play a factor in future funding sources for infrastructure improvements or capital improvement identified projects that may get funding from the state or other funding sources. So we wanted to make sure that our general plan circulation element adequately encompassed all of that, and again, internally consistent so that we didn't run into any problems down the line should we want to apply for some type of subsidiary funding for other transportation related improvements. I'd say one of the most substantive changes to the circulation element that we have included that our current element lacks is we have now integrated a type of level of service standard. We've chose to do the LOS type standard. Most jurisdictions have this, and what an LOS is it's a grading system to measure and describe the operational systems of your local roadways at stoplights. So, for example, a light at El Camino and Atherton Ave may have an identified LOS at a grading scale, let me back up, from A to F, with A being free-flowing traffic and F being total stop. And so by having an established LOS standard for town, this also now allows us, going back to Chair Lane's point about if something was to happen in Fair Oaks, there's a project proposed outside our jurisdictional boundaries, but it may impact us with noise, and it may impact us with traffic. And having these standards now allows us to make a formal comment and, hey, your environmental document on your proposed project says that this intersection is now going to operate at level E. Our identified acceptance level of service standard is C. So we need to mitigate to get ourselves at or closer to the town's identified standards. And then that's...
And with all the construction going on in El Camino Real, for example, on both ends of us, that could be impactful to El Camino as well as Meadowfield.
Yes.
Because of the bleed off on El Camino down when all these places come online and all the people magically just sort of walk to work. That's, I think that's the plan.
Yeah.
Okay.
So we've also included some new policies that hopefully will be running parallel with that long-term traffic study that the town's currently undertaking that's not yet finalized, so that our policies are consistent with the purpose of that study, which is to identify local traffic flow and identify some long-range planning solutions. Again, sometimes policies in a general plan can help benefit or make you eligible for grant or other funding by other government agencies. So that was all taken into consideration as well in proposing the amendments.
Any questions?
Yeah, on page 5, they talk about the Atherton Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan. and the possibility of actually narrowing El Camino
Mhm.
Yeah.
to accommodate that.
Yes.
And when we look down to our neighbor in Menlo Park, the way you inch through that town by car because of the center median and the
Mhm.
fewer lanes,
Mhm.
I'm really astonished that they would consider narrowing our street. I can see accommodating bicycles or something a little bit like they have on our street or many streets around town, but to actually close one and choke it down like that, is that a popular idea? Am I in the minority here?
Well, I think it's an identified possibility in the bicycle pedestrian master plan. I mean, El Camino Real is under the jurisdiction of Caltrans.
Yeah.
So that would
Yeah, I
not
realize
be,
it might be out of our hands, but it
it would be
sounds like
something
they're
that the town would need to
complacent with
work
it.
with Caltrans on, should they want to amend a state highway within the town's jurisdictional boundaries. But if a project like that was to come to light, what the general plan, all the general plan would be doing is providing policy that's either going to support or not support or be neutral on the matter. And so the adopted bicycle and pedestrian master plan already did discuss that and has identified policy in support of such type of improvement, should that improvement ever get formally
Okay.
considered.
Yeah, we should just squeeze traffic back onto Middlefield. Yeah.
If that was to happen, would that mostly happen in conjunction with the Grand Boulevard project, do you think? If that ever
I mean,
happens?
that
Doesn't
is an
happen.
appropriate initiative, I think, to, the Grand Boulevard, yeah, is an initiative versus
Mhm.
an adopted government program. That makes sense, the distinction between the two. It's just a
Yeah.
vision for all the jurisdictions in San Mateo County along the El Camino corridor to sort of join hands and create this, but, yeah.
So I had a question about how this connects with the emergency plan from a traffic flow perspective. So I didn't see anything, did I miss something? I didn't see anything specifically. I see about the bike plan, but I didn't see about the
Yeah.
emergency plan. So, for example, if there was a major accident or fire on one of the on Middlefield, for
Yeah.
example, then what would be our plan around, our flow around that? And I don't know if that has to be highlighted or not, or at least referencing the other plan.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly make, cross-reference internal consistency within probably both, I'd say, description of existing circulation structure of the town as well as policy,
Yeah.
tie it back to
Yeah. Even
what
if
we've
it's-
identified roadway-wise
Right.
for the emergency
Mhm.
operation
Right.
plan. I gotcha. Mhm.
Right. And the other thing on traffic flow and circulation, the number one thing that I see affecting traffic flow circulation is school location and the way people drop their kids off at school now.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any highlight, because I know at Ensenada, for example, that's like, I used to always forget and take a right on Ensenada around 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then I go, oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There is no way to get out of this place. So, that's one of the ones that is a real, the high school is much less of a problem in terms of traffic flow to me than Ensenada.
So, if I'm hearing then, if we don't have something that adequately speaks to it, a policy that we could tie back to perhaps our existing municipal code requirements of private school master plan updates and how they may support our identified circulation goals within the town?
Yes, something like that.
Okay.
And the other thing is on page 10, where you have all the streets listed out, as what their type is.
Yes.
If we had our preferred A, B, C, D, F on that column, another column that said our target on this street is an A or
Oh, I
C.
see.
That would highlight the difference between the Ensenada collector and it would highlight Atherton Avenue and Ensenada as collectors that have schools on, because they both get dramatically impacted by school traffic.
Okay.
Right?
Right, so put in so we have identified as minimum acceptable standards for our local streets, for example, LOSC, whereas arterials and collectors, which are gonna be everything here, is identified at D. So these would all be the same.
Right,
So make a note of that within the table, so that
Yeah.
it's comprehensive in
Yeah.
one place.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay.
the other thing to think about, and I know if this is valid or not, on Middlefield Road, there are regions that are different flow than others. So you get around Marsh Road,
Mhm.
within 2 blocks of Marsh Road going north, or whatever it technically is, east or west or whatever it is.
Yeah, this way.
Yeah, towards Redwood City.
Yeah.
All right, 2 blocks there. If you're trying to get out of the park, for example, take a left, you can't for a certain time of the day. All right. If you're trying to get out of Lindenwood at a certain time around school, you coming onto Middlefield, you can't turn left onto Lindenwood. Whereas if you get beyond the high school, there's not much of an issue, and if you get beyond Marsh going towards Redwood City,
Mhm.
it's not much of an issue. But going from Redwood City down Marsh, it's always an issue in the morning. It's hard to get out of the street out here onto Middlefield left.
Yeah.
So there might be sections of Middlefield where you go like Middlefield north of Marsh, Middlefield Marsh to
Yeah.
whatever,
Mhm.
and then highlight those because those ratings might be different,
Mm.
and
Okay.
certainly the issue is different. Certainly Marsh Road is a more of a heavy duty collector than a typical collector street, and that flows into collector streets that are impacted by this heavy duty collector. And that's because, so it's starting to differentiate traffic that's going through Atherton compared to traffic that's caused by Atherton itself.
Yeah, and there may be additional conclusions that are currently in process of being
Yeah.
evaluated in this townwide traffic study
Yeah,
that are more solidified at
Yeah.
the point that we come back to you
yes,
with this next draft. And so I can take note, though, I understand the point is if there is more additional detail that will provide a smaller scale or segmented analysis on our major arterials, describe it as such.
either that or reference the traffic plan in this, right?
Yeah.
Right, so because
Okay.
the traffic analysis may be more minuscule, more microscopic than this should be. But if this references it to remind people to go check that, it may trigger some issues in terms of planning and also in terms of our actions as a community when something comes up.
Yes.
We are going to have an issue with traffic on El Camino in our segment of it based on the development north
Oh, absolutely.
and south. And
Yeah.
I've never heard us talk about that, and I don't know that we protested it.
I think it's a
But
major concern.
Oh, yeah, when
Yeah.
you look at all the car lots that are gonna be turned to condos,
Yeah.
down the park,
Yeah,
and then go north.
And
and
north of us too.
And the setbacks are like whatever the sidewalk is, it's triple distance to the front door,
Yeah.
you know?
Usually zero
Right.
setback lines.
Yeah, I know, it's like, I sit there and go like, the building looks 4 stories taller when it's 8 feet away from the edge of the road, you know? So it's like, so all this is in the name of affordable housing, but it's not in the name of decent living in my mind, so, you know, we've gotta at least get on the radar screen on it.
Right, it's gonna affect the quality of life, but El Camino is really gonna be impacted
Yeah.
with the additional residents. And as I was reading through, you're almost reading my mind, as I was reading through the policies, and is it possible to, or is it even a consideration to put some kind of statement in there about monitoring future traffic rates? And I'm not even sure if it belongs in here, I'm just asking as a question. And also considerations about safety, because El Camino's been a problem in the past. And they put in the flashing lights on demand at Stockbridge and I think it's Alejandra. I really think they need one at Selby. So is there any way we can put things in there about evaluation of future traffic rates as it impacts safety, things like that?
Of course.
I know it's kind of abstract, but that's kind of what I'm thinking when you look at the development that's going on and looking ahead to the next 3 to 5 years and how it's going to impact El Camino.
It's pretty predictable.
Mm-hmm.
Well, anything that happens in El Camino impacts Middlefield,
And more cars are gonna be
Sure.
more,
And
more
as it-
pedestrians too.
As it is, when I come out, I've been seeing it now, I make sure my traction control is disengaged, so I don't bog down right as I hit the accelerator coming out of the.
So, yes, we can certainly add some policy.
I'm sorry to have more specifics, you
Yeah,
know,
no, no, I
to address.
understand,
but-
yeah, and it would be a lot of coordination with, Caltrans in this case.
Right.
It has to do with Dr. L'Oreal, and that's fine, yeah, absolutely.
And maybe it's addressed in the emergency preparedness program, but in the event we move to shared services with other cities, for instance, fire, will this circulation plan consider that in any way?
Well, it could, I mean, going back to what the circulation element is intended to do or structure for us as a town, which is to identify our roadway, bikeway, pedestrian system within the town. If we're doing that ourselves with our emergency operation, or we're doing it jointly, the infrastructure that supports that isn't necessarily gonna change substantially, but it could.
Right.
So we could identify that type of future joint service, just to assure that that service is following our long-term vision of how we'd like to keep and or grow
And
in
can
what
get
sort
to
of
us.
way. And get
And
to
can
us,
get to
yeah.
us. That
So
would
that
be
was,
my-
I think, the
yeah.
point I heard
Right.
earlier, is
Yeah.
a little bit more integration within the circulation element to identify components of the emergency operation plan that have to do with
Right.
circulation.
Right,
Mhm.
at least put it on the radar screen here so that people reference
Yeah.
back and forth.
Yep.
Again, in my mind, this is like this is the architectural view of
Mhm.
what streets are and what we intended them to be used of.
Yes.
And if somebody shows up and says, oh, by the way, I saw your middle field is your freeway, no, we don't call it freeway. You know, that's right, so by us saying what it is, that's the first step, and then how do you use what it is?
Yes.
You know, you don't use an arterial for this, but you use it for that, and that type of
Mhm.
thing. Yeah, all right, that makes sense, all right, anything else?
Nope.
All right,
Thank you.
we might set a long time record on for 2 items.
Yeah.
All right, and then the adoption of the, item 5C is the adoption of 2019 Planning Commission meeting schedule. So it's pretty consistent with this year.
Mhm.
Mhm.
I don't see anything that looks dramatically different.
Where did you get that?
It was the last page
Should be
in
the
the
final
packet.
page.
It was a standalone page though, it wasn't stapled on.
So
So
we'll take a look at
you
it.
might have missed it because it wasn't attached, or maybe not, it wasn't attached to yours. It's just a single page,
Yeah, that's what I see.
and it was on the
This is
very
yours,
back.
right?
Yeah, but if you wanna take a look at it while we're talking
Well, I
about it.
better see, January 23rd, okay, that's all I need to know.
Month to month.
It's taken a month at a time.
Exactly.
All right, we need a motion to accept this calendar.
I get somebody to copy that for me. I don't think I got one. Can you have one, or? you want- Oh, good, okay, thanks.
I'll
I'll
move
get
that
it.
we approve the 2019 Planning Commission meeting schedule.
Motion
I'll second.
and seconded, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, none? All right. And then we would have a commissioner's report, if there's any commissioners with a report. No? All right. Let's see, maybe you can include in your staff report. Since I was on the phone for the joint meeting,
Yes.
you know, my end went great. I wasn't sure how this end went.
What you need?
How long did it take you to wake up after the meeting?
Oh, no, I was fine. Very funny, very funny. All right, so let's go with the staff report, and maybe tell me the answer to my question on that.
Sure, that was actually gonna be my topic of conversation.
Oh.
Was in follow-up to your joint study session, the council will be considering the revised draft heritage tree ordinance and guidelines for another discussion format at the December 19th city council meeting, so they're not taking it to take any action, but to integrate all of the comments final direction comments, I should say, that were received at the joint study session between yourselves and them a month or so back, and have directed staff to integrate that into track change versions of both the ordinance and the guidelines, so we can see now on paper what those changes are going to look like, and have additional discussion and further direction to staff on any other refinements to the text that integrates all of the policy direction that was received at the meeting. But to answer your question, I think that from the staff perspective, I thought the meeting went well. To thank the commission again for taking the time to go back and have this discussion again. I think it was productive, and we received, I think, very clear direction, and it helps to integrate all of that direction into a workable ordinance.
Okay. Do you know I went actually out to the lobby and told them.
Did you see anybody came?
No, I went out to the lobby.
Personal thing.
I went to the lobby and I said to the clerk, if anybody comes in and wants to know the plan, and there's going to be a planning commission, if they ask to be part of the planning commission.
Uh-huh.
For one, tell them that they're lost, and two, call me, and I'll come out and conduct the meeting out in the lobby. But I went back in my room, and they never
Yeah.
called. And I went back and checked to make sure later if anybody showed up.
Such a kick. I would have gone just to check it out.
I know. I know. It's kind of funny. It was kind of because it has to be posted that it was
Right.
available out there.
Right.
So
Oh.
anybody in Sedalia that would have wanted to
Yeah,
take
yeah.
Hilarious.
And you're
So,
supposed to leave your door open.
oh, you know what? I did. You know, I did not lock it.
Funny.
But I was,
Yeah.
I knew that I had to be on call for anything that
Yeah.
happened.
Really, it's a quirky set of rules.
Yeah. Yeah, it was,
Anyway,
yeah.
I think it was time well spent. I think it's important. I think there were some missed signals, and I just think it was a good use of time.
Well, I couldn't see any signals, so I wasn't,
No,
I
I think
wasn't bothered.
before, I think
Before,
miscommunication in the
Oh.
past and some misunderstandings, and I thought it went really
Well,
well.
I hope we were able to fill in some of the blanks.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Like you're talking about, they kind of misunderstood how much we discussed things, or how we discussed things, or
Yeah.
how we came
Yes.
to some conclusions
Yeah.
in what we discussed.
Yeah.
And I think there was more of a impression that we just kind of randomly made decisions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think, I thought we clarified that pretty
Yeah.
well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too.
All right, good.
Time well spent.
Yeah, good. I was hoping that was the impression on this side, and was not, how soon can we get them off the phone? Although that could have been
No.
stage 2.
No, I think it's really important. I don't think the process works otherwise. I mean, you're
Right.
supposed to give them information, and they're supposed to give you some direction, and if that's not happening, and
Mhm.
I think we had done one with Parks and Rec, and that went really, really well, and so I think it kind of paved the way for this, and I can
Mhm.
see that happening again.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's good.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, any other points, any other items?
No, happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy
All right, great. As I said earlier, if you shake that bag, there's a 10-foot setback when you open it. All right, I need a motion to adjourn. A motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion.
There's a motion.
Adjourn.
Moving second, all those in favor say aye. Aye.